Okay, guys. All right. I literally spent the last 15 minutes trying to play with Screencastify to figure this out. So this is the best way I can do it. All right. So if you don't like it, tough. All right. Okay, guys. So we're gonna be talking about the beginnings of the empire in the New World. All right. New World. Okay, it's been there for a long time. Indigenous people have found it thousands of years ago, but new to Europe. All right. One of the questions that I want to ask, and I think that this is a really interesting question to ask for all of American history, is who rules and by what right? Obviously, in the United States of America, although this is a little tricky, okay, if you rule in a democracy, you are doing so but with the consent of the people that you are governing, okay, that are governed by. This seems pretty basic, right? Okay, but what gives a king the right to rule? Okay, what gives a chief the right to rule? All right, these are questions that really humans have been figuring out for thousands of years, and a lot of people gave a great deal of thought to during this time. Okay, so we're going to talk about two different kings here. Okay, first king that I want to talk about is King James the First and the Sixth. Okay, no, he's not two different people. Okay, he's just king of two different places. Okay, he was born in 1566. He became the king of Scotland in 1567 when his mother passed away. All right, in 1603, when his cousin Queen Elizabeth died, all right, he inherited the throne of the King of England. All right, so he actually became. This is what really makes the United Kingdom. And I already talked about this with some of you, okay? But this unites Scotland and Great Britain. Eventually, Wales, Ireland would be brought onto this into what we would call the United Kingdom. But this is kind of a monumental thing. One thing that I want to emphasize here is this idea of the Church of England. Okay, so something that had been going on in Europe, and my seniors know this, okay, is we've had something called the Protestant Reformation, where we had the Christian church, or the Catholic Church. Catholic in Latin actually means universal. All right, was split up into all these different parts with all these different philosophies. Many of these philosophies, especially those of Protestants, were predicated on the idea that in order to receive salvation, you needed to actually read and interpret the Bible for yourself. Okay, this is going to be really relevant later on as we go. Okay, James is a Protestant. Okay, more specifically, he is a Anglican. Okay, in the Church of England, okay, Henry VIII, okay, you got to go back to his grandpa, actually, Elizabeth's dad. He broke away from the Catholic Church, and when he did so, he made a new church, and he made the King of England the head of that church, which is awfully convenient if you are the King of England. Okay, inconvenient otherwise. All right, so this is going to be relevant because he is almost like a pope. Okay, he's a religious leader. Okay, and he has this pope-like authority. He doesn't look up to any other kings. All right, the other king I want to talk about, and this is actually kind of interesting because is Powhatan. All right, and I'm probably saying that wrong. I'm almost certainly saying it wrong, and I apologize. Okay, Powhatan was born in 1545. Okay, so right, about 12 years prior to King James. All right, and he, in his own right, was a king. He inherited rule over 6 different neighboring communities at the death of his father. And he actually, into the latter part of the 1600s, he began to expand into other neighboring communities. So he was building his own empire. Okay, so it's interesting as we perceive these things, as we think of European kings. Okay, but this monarchy, this kind of system of rule, is not something that is new. Okay, it's not something that is isolated to Europe. It's something that's kind of in different places all around the world. This image that you see here, this is actually would have been. Some people say that it was actually worn by Powhatan. It would have been deerskin. These designs that we see here are actually seashells, and these different dots would actually be like a map. Okay, to show the places where Powhatan had ruled. Okay, we're going to talk about this here in a couple of slides, but it's just, again, interesting to look at these trappings of monarchy. The same way that an English king would wear an elaborate robe, this again would be a symbol of status and wealth within Powhatan's culture. Okay, English colonization, it really kicks off with King James. Queen Elizabeth, the prior monarch, was really kind of caught up with other things. She was waging a war against the Spanish, as were a lot of people, all right, and was really kind of sidetracked by that. When King James comes to power, he has this new kind of interest in colonizing the New World. Okay, so he issues 2 charters, all right, and remember, we talked about the different kinds of charters that we have, or different colonies that we have in the New World. These charters were financial charters. Okay, so these were essentially, people were investing money. They were financing the trip, so they were giving the money for the ships, equipment, provisions, anything that you would need to go to a new world, and they were expecting a return on their investment. All right. If you guys all gave me like, $10 and expected me to invest it, you would expect that you would have a return on your investment. So if you gave me $5, maybe you got 7 back, you'd be happy. Okay, so that's important. Okay, so he issues two charters, one in Virginia and one in Plymouth. Okay, this quote actually comes from Jill Lepore. It's interesting to note that these colonies were different than the French and the Spanish for some key reasons. I love this quote because it's really telling. One thing is that they were Protestant. And as Lepore points out, Catholics could make converts by the act of baptism, but Protestants were supposed to teach converts to read the Bible. That means permanent settlements, families, communities, schools, and churches. Okay? All right. In the Catholic Church, it's kind of a powerful thing. I was raised Catholic, so I'm not throwing shade on anybody. You just kind of go and you dunk their head underwater, which is hilarious to see new babies get dunked underwater. I don't know if I'm sick for liking that, but it's fun. All right. And then, hey, you're a Catholic now. Good job. Congratulations. Okay. In Protestant, okay, that's a little bit different. Okay, because you have to read and understand the Bible for yourself. Okay, so the French and the Spanish could go by. They take in native people, dunk their head, give them a Christian name like Stephen. All right, and hey, Stephen, you're Catholic now. Congratulations, welcome to the club. All right, but that's not the same for English. All right, for the English, they need to actually teach them the language. They need to teach them how to read. Okay, then you have to teach them how to understand the Bible for themselves. Okay, we're also going to see that this is largely going to be commercial. All right, now obviously the French and the Spanish were driven by economic means. We talked about God, gold, and glory. Okay, however, okay, those were vassals. Okay, so they were basically extensions of the French and Spanish kings. So anything that they found, yes, that a little bit of that wealth would come to them, but ultimately that wealth is going back to the king. These are essentially private companies. Okay, Virginia Company, the Plymouth Company. All right, and therefore they operate like a company. Okay, so that means that you have investors that have a return on that investment, and that means that you are going to have more long-lasting and durable communities. All right, finally, and this is really important, guys, and I can't really emphasize this enough. One thing that the English bring with them is this sense of English liberties. All right, and that actually goes back all the way till this, and I can't tell you. Mr. Bannock can tell you the date off the top of his head because he's a freak. Just kidding, love Mr. Bannock. All right, but this is the signing of the Magna Carta by King John. I think it goes back to the 1200s. All right, I actually might ask that question. What was the Magna Carta signed? I don't know. Okay, all right, and this is, it's really insignificant at the time. King John was a weak king. If you guys know any of the Robin Hood stories, King John is the king in that. And all these lords, he had all these abuses, and the lords gathered up and they basically, like, at sword point, made him sign this contract saying, hey, you're not going to violate our rights. Over a number of years, this becomes what we call common law. Okay, I'm sorry to use air quotes. It's just called that, common law. And in common law, you have a certain set of rights as an Englishman that goes back to the Magna Carta. All right, the Spanish and the French don't have this. They have no conception of rights as a citizen. All right, okay, and if you're paying attention at home right now, that might start to sound something familiar. Okay, we have this fundamental idea, okay, as Americans, that we have certain inalienable rights. Man, I wonder where that could come from. All right, and it comes from this. Okay, so that right now is not huge, but over the course of a couple hundred years, and a little thing we like to call benign neglect or salutary neglect, it is going to become important. All right, so pay attention to that. English liberties, it's going to come back for us. Okay, Jamestown. All right, so Jamestown, obviously, that is one that we've been talking about. It is founded in 1607, thus why time period 2 starts in 1607. Okay, and this is going to be part of the Virginia Company. Okay, John Smith, he is ultimately going to be one of the leaders of this. Fun fact is that he actually was clasped in chains and put in the brig on the way to the New World for plotting to take over the Jamestown colony and make himself king. Okay, the way that they were going to set up their government is they basically put a locked box that had instructions for when they got to the New World that wasn't supposed to be open until they got there. When they got there, they opened it, and it basically said that John Smith was supposed to be one of their governors. Okay, so the chains came off, and John Smith became one of the governors of this new place, Jamestown. All right. Okay, unfortunately, though, okay, because they had heard a lot of these stories about the Spanish and because they were ultimately looking to make a profit, okay, the people that they brought with them weren't necessarily great, okay, for exploring in the New World. Okay, they brought soldiers, jewelers, gentlemen adventurers. Okay, and these people, although good at killing people, doing stuff with gold, all right, and just in general being like an inventory guy, all right, they're really good at doing those things, okay, but they're not so great at clearing fields and farming. Okay, so in 1608, John Smith actually has to make the rule: he who does not work shall not eat. Okay, maybe some of you guys have that rule at your house. Maybe some of you should have that rule at your house. I don't know. Okay, but it basically has to force them into work. Okay, one of the side effects of this is that they're really hungry and they don't have food and they don't have good farmers. So where could they get food from? Where could they get food from? They could steal it from the Native Americans. Okay, so this is where they go, and they're ultimately going to harass Powhatan. They're going to try to get some of them to provide food. They're going to take some of their land. A lot of these things are going to happen. All right, and it's kind of interesting, and it goes back to how the English settlements were different. They're trying to set up long-term settlements. Okay, so that's going to change the way they treat the indigenous populations. Where the Spanish more, the French are a little bit different, and we're going to talk about them here in a second. The Spanish just looked to dominate the people that they came across. They were looking to conquer them. Okay, because the English were setting up permanent settlements, they tried diplomacy first. Okay, so they tried to make a relationship with the Native Americans before just going out into all-out war. All right, and so this is actually a quote from John Smith. John Smith, he stages this elaborate ceremony where he puts a fine robe over Powhatan's shoulders, gives a scepter in his hand, puts a crown on him, and basically says, that if you accept these things, you're accepting submission to the English king. All right, Powhatan, their chief king, received voluntarily a crown and scepter with full acknowledgement of the duty and submission. Now, that's Smith's version of the story. That's probably not really the case, okay? He probably accepted it. But one thing that we know is that gift giving in a lot of indigenous societies is drastically different than how it is within English and European societies, okay? In European societies, it's transactional, okay? I give you this, and therefore you give me that. Okay, so I am giving you the scepter, and therefore you're going to give me obedience. That's how it works in European societies. Okay, in indigenous populations, and a lot of them at least, giving a present was a peace offering. Okay, you would come and you would give a present to somebody, and that was your way of demonstrating that you were friendly. Okay, so there's a good reason to believe that this gesture was understood drastically different from John Smith and Powhatan. All right, and so that's important to note as well. Okay, this differencing opinion. Okay, Jamestown, it got worse. Okay, all right, so actually they send John Smith back, and because they say he has tyrannical rule. All right, but it got pretty bad because again they weren't really good at farming. Okay, this is a new place. All right, and they weren't used to the weather. In the winter of 1609, 1610, one colonist reported one of our colony murdered his wife, ripped the child out of her womb, and threw it into the river after chopped the mother into pieces and salted her for his food. Okay, so literally 1609, 1610, people were eating themselves. Okay, they were cannibalizing themselves. 1622, we've already talked about this document, leads to a large massacre in the Virginia colonies, killing about a quarter of them. Interestingly enough, Thomas Hobbes, who is pictured over here, he's an English philosopher, never actually visited the New World, okay? But he was on the board of the Virginia Stock Company, okay? So he was watching this with interest. My seniors in the room who took world history last year know that Thomas Hobbes' basic philosophy is that in the state of nature is the state of war, okay? So before any governments, whoever was strongest, okay, survived, and the weak suffered. That was what Thomas Hobbes believed. It's worth noting that Thomas Hobbes was watching this thing going on in Virginia. At the same time, in England, we have a little thing called the English Civil War going on, all right, which was, James's son, Charles, gets his head chopped off, and the English are fighting each other for control, okay? But this goes back to this question of who rules and why, all right, and by what right, because Thomas Hobbes believed, his philosophy is that power was the means by which people ruled. All right, that's something that is going to people are going to have differing opinions on. All right, so moving forward, it got better, but then it got worse. Okay, so ultimately they're going to come out of this, and what ultimately saves them, John Rolfe, one of the citizens in Jamestown, is going to ultimately cultivate tobacco. Okay, as John Green so brilliantly points out, tobacco is wildly successful because apparently people love drugs. Okay, they're really easy to sell. because people become super addicted to them. All right. Okay. So that's okay. That's basically what our country is founded on is the sale of tobacco, which we now know is insanely addictive and insanely bad for you. Okay. All right. So that is what essentially saves the Jamestown colony. All right. Now, this is something that I've been putting a lot of thought into this year because when I talked about how politicians have been bringing their politics to our history and it should be the other way around, this is a date that has come up a lot, and that date is 1619. Some of you guys may have heard this date in conversations around your dinner table or maybe on the news, whatever it may be, but it is a red letter date in American history for two reasons. Okay, in 1619, okay, 22 English colonists in the state of Virginia are elected to make up what becomes the House of Burgesses. Okay, the House of Burgesses is the first elected legislative body in the New World. Okay, so we have things like the Mayflower Compact, we have things like earlier than this, but this is the first time that we have representative democracy on the continent of America. Okay, so that is incredibly powerful, incredibly useful. All right, in that same year, literally a couple of months later, okay, the White Lion, which was a English privateer, okay, it captured a Portuguese slave ship, and the how privateers worked is that they would capture a ship and they would take all of their cargo and their goods and they would sell it for a profit that would go to the English crown. Okay, on this particular ship, there happened to be 20 African slaves, okay, captured from the continent. They were put into chains. They were taken to Virginia, and those were the first slaves that showed up on the shores of America. Now, in 1619, slavery is not as big as it's going to be in this latter part of this century, okay? But we're going to talk about why that is, okay? And it has to do with indentured servants, okay? And I'm more on that in a little bit. But again, I know it sounds like I have a history romance here with Jill Lepore. I love her writing. She puts it so eloquently. 20 Englishmen were elected to the House of Burgesses. 20 Africans were condemned to the House of Bondage. Another chapter opened in the American book of Genesis. Liberty and slavery became the American Abel and Cain. Okay, so profound stuff by Jill Lepore. But it does. Both of these things are foundational. Okay, one, our democratic system, which is still thriving today, and the second one is a system of oppression in which we still see the scars deep within our country, okay, from this act in 1619. All right, and that's, for me as a historian, that's not controversial. That's just history. Okay, so fast forward a little bit. Okay, we are going to see that as we start to see these different colonies develop, one of the really important kind of moves towards colonial unity is going to be the New England Confederation. All right, so this is going to be the first time that you are going to see different colonies in the New World attempting to form one larger unit of protection. The reason that they are doing this is that they were looking for defense against indigenous populations. Okay, we see that this is, oh my gosh, and I can't even try to say his name. I would, but I would butcher it. But this is Powhatan's brother. Powhatan actually dies in the year 1622, the year of the Virginia Massacre. Okay, so Powhatan's brother, all right, takes over the rule, and we're actually going to see the Third Powhatan War from 1644 to 1646. Okay, this outside threat is going to urge these colonies on the New World, the English colonies, to unify together in order to form a common defense. Okay, that's something that is going to be incredibly significant as we move forward in American history. It's this early sentiment of federalism, where you have a larger body made up of smaller states, or in this case, colonies. Okay, the members are made up of the Bay Colony, Plymouth, New Haven, and Connecticut Valley settlements. All right, and this is also going to see a time. All right, the English each had 2 votes. Okay, all right. I don't know why that's a problem. Why is that a problem? Answer the puzzle. Why is that a problem? Okay. All right. This is also significant because this coincides with the era that we call benign neglect. The other word that I'm going to put in there that I'll sometimes call it is salutary. Okay. Salutary and benign have similar meanings. Benign means harmless, and salutary means salutary. That's not it. Maybe salutary means like healthful or like beneficial. All right. Neglect. And basically what we see is from the time of King James, so scrolling back here, this is King James. His son is going to be Charles the First. Okay, Charles the First is going to have his head chopped off. Okay, and that's going to lead basically into 30-ish years of civil war. In the meantime, we're going to have a dictator named Oliver Cromwell. Okay, eventually They're going to name James the Second to be reinstate the monarchy, but he's a closet Catholic, so they get rid of him, which gives us Charles II in 1660. All right. So when Charles II is restored to the throne in 1616, he's going to want to take back some of that control, okay, that had been lost during the time of benign neglect or salutary neglect, when England was otherwise occupied with other things that were going on. All right, and he ultimately revokes the Massachusetts Bay Colony Charter. Okay. Another thing that is going to be very important, all right, and this is a term that you are going to need to define, is mercantilism. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go ahead. This is going to be an Ed puzzle question. I'm going to pause it, define mercantilism, copy and paste it. It's your business. Okay. But mercantilism is an economic theory. All right. And it's the idea is that you want to accumulate as much wealth within your country as possible. Okay. All right. And so if we think about this, okay, if we're trying to accumulate wealth, what role do the colonies play in that? What role do the colonies play in that? Okay. All right. Okay. Yeah. So I'm sure a lot of you guys came up with some good answers. Okay. One of the reasons that the roles they play in it is to purchase purchase goods from Europe. Okay. So since England is trying to accumulate as much gold as they can within their borders, okay, they're not going to want to trade. They're not going to want to trade goods for goods. Okay. So they're going to want the new colonies to buy goods and give them gold for it. Okay. Okay. Also, all right, this is going to lead to the triangle trade, okay, where we see finished goods coming to Africa, okay, trading for slaves. Slaves are going to come to the New World. Okay, it's actually kind of important to note most of the slaves that come to the New World, all right, are actually going to end up in Brazil. Okay, and there's different reasons for that. I would love to talk to you guys about the comparison of Brazilian and African slavery because it is interesting, okay, but not in this video. Okay, a lot of it's going to come to the West Indies, where the major industry is sugar, which is an incredibly labor-intensive crop, and many slaves are also going to come to the Americas. Okay, all right. So the idea is in mercantilism is that the Americans are buying goods, okay, with gold. All right, and the English aren't. They are not buying slaves or anything with gold because, again, they want to maintain it. They're trading goods for slaves. Okay, so that's how that's going to go. So if we looked at this, manufactured slaves, raw goods, raw materials. You guys are familiar with triangle trade. Okay, so mercantilism is ultimately going to interfere with the trade that's going on in the New World. Okay, the navigation laws in 1650 are essentially going to make it that you have to, any goods that are going anywhere from the world, okay, all right, from the colonies have to stop in England first. Okay, so for example, all right, if you were trading tobacco from Virginia, which again became incredibly popular because, you know, drugs, addicting, all right, they're going to go to they're going to go to have to go to England first, and then from there they'll go to other places. Okay, so this is again another way of making a favorable balance of trade. Okay, another one you're going to have to define balance of trade. Freeze. Okay, and I'm back. Okay, all right. So make that balance of trade. I'm sure that you guys looked this up. Balance of trade is making sure that more goods are going out and gold coming in. Okay. So another thing that is that production in the colonies is limited. Okay, so colonists can only produce certain enumerated or listed goods. All right, and this is because Britain doesn't want to compete with the colonies with things that they're already good at making. All right, another problem is currency. Okay, all the gold is going to be drained out of the Americas because they have to pay for gold for British goods. Okay, so this is going to essentially lead them to no currency. All right, which is going to resort to a barter system, where you're essentially trading goods for goods. All right. They try to make paper currency, but it actually gets vetoed by the royal government because they believe that it is going to be inflationary. Okay. So inflating the value of something, that means, so like if I was to give you your favorite candy and I gave you 5 pieces, okay, or I gave you 500 pieces, can I borrow one? The answer is yes. I can borrow one. Thank you. All right. But now you only have 5 pieces of your favorite candy. Can I borrow one now? You're like, I don't know. That's my candy, Mr. Loyd. Okay. Because you have less of it, it's more valuable. Because you have more of it, it is less valuable. So more of something inflates the price, which means that it has less ultimate value. Okay. So that's, if you've ever asked the question, it's like, the government makes money. Why don't they just print more? Okay. The reason is if they printed more money, that money would be worth less and it would be counterproductive. Okay. So the more you know. Okay. This is an example of a piece of paper currency produced in Philadelphia. This is much later in 1776, but that is it. It's a fun story. The term rags to riches, they would actually, the printers would print paper off of rags. So they would they would buy rags from people, so like leftover cloth, and then they would put that out, and that's what they would print on. So they would literally turn rags into riches. They would turn rags into physical money. The more you know. All right, merit to mercantilism. Okay, the things that it did. All right, so it changes after 1763, but that's outside our scope. I'm going to talk about that soon. All right, it ships parts for Britain. Okay, so that is a big industry that's going to grow in the New World, especially like in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, is that ship parts are going to be a big part of it. They also received the protection of the British Navy, okay, which is the most powerful navy in the world. All right, it is the most powerful navy in the world, so they have the freedom to trade, okay, without having to fear Spanish raiders or other pirates or things like that. Okay, also, the Virginia tobacco, they receive a monopoly on that, okay, which is going to make Virginia crazy wealthy, okay, bonkers wealthy, along with slaves is going to make them very, very, very wealthy, okay? So the downside is that the American colonies are at the mercy of British mercantilists, okay, British merchants, okay, and they felt used by the British, okay, so this led to revolts, all right, and it stifled any economic initiatives, all right. So now we got to talk about this guy Nathaniel Bacon, okay, which he is not nearly as delicious as he sounds, okay, but if you remember Bacon, okay, then this will be helpful for it, okay. So he is a Western Pennsylvania farmer. He was an indentured servant. Okay, so the way that indentured servitude works is that you would volunteer for a term of service. Okay, so say I take Aiden Butcher here. All right, so Aiden, I'm going to pay your way to get to the New World. Okay, all right, I'm going to buy for the ship. Once you get there, I'm going to give you a place to live. I'm going to give you food. In exchange, you work for me for 7 years. Okay, so you don't receive a salary for those entire 7 years, but you get to go to the New World. I'll take care of you for 7 years, and then when you're free, I will give you a slice of land. Okay, sounds like a pretty solid deal. All right, other than the 7 years of not getting paid. But what happens is we are going to see. Okay, I'm going to steal this map here. Is that all the good land is along the coast? Okay, for obvious reasons. We don't have roads. We don't have trains. Okay, it's hard to get your crops to market unless you have water. Okay, so as the more indentured servants that we're going to get over the years, the farther and farther inland we're going to go. Okay, which means that we are going to have a harder time getting our goods to market, and also we are going to run into the problem that the Jamestown colonists first ran into, is that indigenous populations are not going to like the fact that you're cutting down their woods and taking their land. Okay, they're not going to like that one bit. All right, which is going to lead to conflict between the colonists and indigenous tribes. Okay, farmers. So they actually they do get upset with the natives. Don't get me wrong, but the real beef is with Governor Berkeley. Okay, Berkeley is the governor of Virginia. All right, and he basically says that they were not there to protect them. They weren't actually helping protect them from the indigenous populations. All right, and so they go out and they actually do this big revolt. Berkeley deals with the rebels harshly, I believe. So Bacon himself actually dies of illness. Okay, now this is going to have a pretty big consequence. All right, one result of this is if wealthy landowners are weary of white indentured servants. Okay, so they're now kind of becoming growingly concerned because you have to exchange something with these people, with white indentured servants. You have to give them land. Okay, so this is going to make them in this time, and this is what you really need to know. Okay, and actually, I'm going to need you all to Google the year. Okay, of the Bacon's Rebellion. Ed Puzzle. Okay, all right. I'm back. All right, so this is going to make a shift in the workforce in the New World. Instead of paying indentured servants, we are going to work towards developing African slavery. Now, I don't have a slide on this, but I do want to talk about it for a second because it is interesting. All right, some historians theorize, they ask the question, what came first, racism or slavery? And the answer is yes, okay? All right, there was racism against people from the African continent, okay? They were believed, okay, much like the people on the American continents, is to be savages or to not have culture, to not have religion. We know this is false, okay? The African cultures on that continent are incredibly diverse with thousands of different languages, thousands of different forms of worship, highly complex social structures, in all of this, but that's not what That's not what the Europeans saw. The Europeans saw people that didn't speak their language, that didn't dress like them, and didn't worship their God. Okay, and so for them, they were one step below. All right, so that racism was there, absolutely. However, okay, in the early parts of America, we are going to see indentured servants. Okay, so poor whites and slaves are going to form relationships together. Okay, we're going to have a lot of early examples of whites and Africans, European people of European descent and African descent marrying and having children. We're going to see situations where they're going to rebel together. Okay, so some historians actually theorize that this concept of race is something that was imposed upon poor whites and poor Africans in order to separate them. Okay, because it's really dangerous when all the poor people gang up on you. Okay, there's more poor people than rich people. We'll all acknowledge that. Okay, so if you're the minority of rich people, you don't want all the poor people working together. Okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to give the poor white people a story where they are better than the poor black people. All right, and that is going to sound like a really attractive story because you're not going to have much else. All right, and this story, okay, of this idea of superiority based on race, okay, is something that is going to play a role. I don't know, until 2020 probably. Okay, but definitely during the American Civil War, definitely during the Jim Crow South, and for a lot of years afterwards. Okay, the Dominion of New England. Okay, so New England is also established under royal authority. Okay, this includes New England, New York, East and West New Jersey. Similar to what we saw earlier with the, what did I call it? It was called something. It was called the New England Confederation. All right, Dominion of New England is going to serve to protect the colonists, those colonists, against native attacks and the administration of the navigation laws, the mercantilistic policies. Okay, so we are going to see that this is going to lead to some different things. All right, we're going to. So obviously, one thing that we haven't really talked about. We talked about the Anglican Church, and we talked about how that was important. But a lot of the English people that were traveling here were actually traveling because they didn't agree with the Anglican Church. Okay, and it's not that they were Catholic; it's because they were what we call Puritans, or some of them were at least. Okay, some of them came here for economic reasons, but the Puritans they didn't think that the Church of England was pure enough. Okay, thus the name. Okay, so they thought that that was still kind of corrupted and still was too much like Catholicism to them. All right, and so a lot of them came to this country to be able to practice the religion freely. All right, we're also going to see some Catholics come here too. That's where Maryland is actually going to become a haven for Catholic settlers. It actually is named after Queen Mary of Scots, who was the last Catholic. Actually, that's not true. It's Queen Mary was, I believe, James II's wife, who was Catholic. Pretty sure that's true. Could be wrong. Someone Google that. All right. Sir Edmund Andros, he stopped town meetings, placed restrictions on courts, the press, and schools, taxed without representations. All right. The Glorious Revolution ends Dominion in New England. All right. Ultimately, what this is going to do is it's going to result in the breakdown of policies enforcing the navigation laws, and it's going to make a contempt for the new royal authority in New England. Okay. This is important. Again, this is still pretty early on, but in about 60 years, it's going to lead to a little thing we call the American Revolution. Okay. All right. Some things that are also interesting and important to point out. You guys, I actually don't know if you got to the Crucible last year, if you guys got caught up. Okay. But this is kind of is indicative. This happens in the 1640s, 1650s. All right. It's kind of indicative of this class structure that we have going on in the New World. All right, it also has a lot to do with power and authority, okay? What we're going to see is a number of poor, landless white women are going to accuse more prosperous merchant class of being witches, okay? The important thing about this to know is that witches were very much considered to be real, okay? And I shouldn't say that because witches are real. It is an actual religion recognized by the IRS, okay? But they believed in people that had convened with the devil in order to be able to get black magic, dark magic. That is not what modern witches are. Okay, some of you probably know that, but that's what they believed it was to be. All right, the first person actually accused of a slave, as many of you again know, is a slave named Tituba. That's actually a true story. Who was taken from, I believe, the West Indies and was practicing some of parts of her religion that were taken from her original African culture. Okay, and anything besides Catholicism was very much seen as being like witchcraft to the Puritans. Okay, so it starts to become this fear that Puritanism is being eclipsed by commercialism. All right, and kind of makes this uproar within the society. All right, real quickly, meanwhile, in France, okay, France is establishing their own colonies in Canada. All right, Samuel de Champlain as the father of New France. Okay, and they actually they have a different kind of relationship with Native Americans. They do fight ally with the Hurons, but they ultimately defeat the incredibly powerful Iroquois. Okay, the Iroquois had this vast empire within there, the Iroquois Confederation. The Iroquois hamper French efforts in the Ohio River Valley, so it was more of an alliance. Okay, but they're going to be a lot more respectful of indigenous populations, largely because the French really weren't looking to set up permanent settlements. Okay, so they weren't as much taking the land, they weren't cutting down trees, they weren't forcing the religion on them as much. Okay, so they didn't they were it was a lot more of a pleasant relationship with the French and the native indigenous populations. All right, we're going to see that that's going to be significant when we get to the French and Indian War. All right, they start to fan out, and actually, I wish I could pull up a map of the United States. Here's one. Okay, they're gonna fan out, and French exploration is going to follow riverways. Okay, so right here we see the St. Lawrence Seaway. Okay, which starts up here, goes through Quebec, goes down through Lake Huron, through Lake Erie, and comes ultimately right up here to Detroit, or the land between the rivers. I think that's what it means. Okay, which is going to be a early French settlement. All right. Okay, so we're going to see that's how they're ultimately going to travel. Okay, they do convert to Catholicism. We already talked about the difference between that being pushed in the Ohio River Valley. Okay, so this is all setting us up, and I'm not going to talk about this today. This is all setting us up, okay, between a clash of these different empires. Okay, so we have the English colonies that are forming around the Atlantic seaboard. We have the French colonies that are forming up through Canada and down through the main parts of the Americas here. Okay, again, following riverways, Mississippi coming all the way down here to New Orleans. All right, and this is going to lead to what Winston Churchill actually called the First World War, the 7 Years' War. All right. Okay, guys, so that's what I got for you today. Please, please, please remember to bring some questions to the class on Friday, and I'd be happy to answer them. Can't wait to see you guys then.